This is a Christmas story, and when my mother was a young girl, she recited the same story in Frankfort, Kentucky, at her church there. So when I was a young girl, in fact, it was Christmas Eve night in 1932, and I was 12 years old, and I recited this in my church in Louisville, Kentucky. Henry Van Dyke wrote this book, and when he wrote it, he was not a young man. In fact, he was old, and he was sick, and he was lying in bed feeling sorry for himself and thinking about all the things that he had wanted to do in his lifetime and had not accomplished. When all of a sudden, he jumped out of bed and started to write. It was as if some higher being was sending him all these words. And the words flowed from his pen. And he wrote this entire book in one sitting. It is a story of a man named Artaban. And Artaban had planned to meet the three wise men at a certain place at an appointed time, and they were going to follow the star to find the Christ child. Artaban had three precious gems, a sapphire, a ruby, and a pearl, which he planned to present to the Christ child when he found him. Well, on the way to meet his friends at the appointed place, he stopped to minister to a dying man by the side of the road. And in so doing, he gave away his sapphire. So when he got to the place to meet the three wise men, they had waited as long as they felt like they could, so they left without him. And Artaban has spent his entire life searching and searching for Jesus. He parted with his ruby to save the life of a little boy child when King Herod sent out the word that all male children were to be slain. So he gave away his ruby at that time. And now all he has left, and years have passed, is the pearl of great price. 33 years of the life of Artaban had passed away, and he was still a pilgrim and a seeker after light. His hair, once darker than the cliffs of Zagros, was now as white as the wintry snow that covered them. His eyes, that once flashed like flames of fire, were now as dull as embers smoldering among the ashes. Worn and weary, and ready to die, but still looking for the King, he had come for the last time to Jerusalem. He had often passed through this holy city before, searched through all its lanes, crowded hovels, and dark prisons without finding any trace of the family of Nazarenes who had fled from Bethlehem so long ago. But now it seemed as if he must make one more effort, and something seemed to whisper in his heart that at last he might succeed. It was the season of the Passover. The city was thronged with strangers. Children of Israel scattered in far lands all over the world had returned for the great feast. And there had been a confusion of tongues in the narrow streets for many days. But on this day, there was a singular agitation visible in the multitude. The sky was veiled with a portentous gloom, and currents of excitement seemed to flash through the crowd like the thrill that shakes the forest on the eve of a storm. A secret tide was moving them all one way. The clatter of sandals and the soft, thick sound of thousands of bare feet shuffling along over the stones flowed unceasingly along the narrow street that led to the Damascus gate. Artaban joined company with a group of people from his own country, Parthian Jews, who had come up to keep the Passover, and had inquired of them the cause of the tumult and where they were going. "We're going," they answered, "to a place called Golgotha, outside the city wall, where there is to be an execution. Have you not heard what has happened? 2 famous robbers are to be crucified, and with them another, called Jesus of Nazareth, who has done many wonderful works, so that the priests and elders have said that he must die because he gave himself out to be the Son of God. And Pilate is sending him to the cross because he claims to be the King of the Jews." How strangely these familiar words fell upon the tired heart of Artaban. They had led him for a lifetime over land and sea, and now they came to him darkly and mysteriously, like a message of despair. Could it be the same who had been born in Bethlehem 33 years ago, at whose birth the star had appeared, and of whose coming the prophets had spoken? Artaban's heart beat unsteadily with that troubled, doubtful apprehension, which is the excitement of old age. But he said within himself, "The ways of God are stranger than the thoughts of men, and it may be that I shall find the king at last in the hands of his enemies, and shall come in time to offer my pearl for his ransom before he dies." So the old man followed the multitude with slow and painful steps toward the Damascus gate of the city. Just beyond the entrance to the guardhouse, a troop of Macedonian soldiers came down the street, dragging a young girl with torn dress and disheveled hair. As Imagine paused to look at her with compassion, she broke suddenly from the hands of her tormentors and threw herself at his feet, clasping him around the knees. She had seen his white cap and the winged circle on his breast. "Have pity on me, have pity on me, and save me for the sake of the God of purity. I too am a daughter of the true religion. My father was a merchant, but he is dead, and I'm seized for his debts to be sold as a slave. Save me, oh save me." Artaban trembled. Was it his great opportunity or his last temptation? He could not tell. One thing only was clear in the darkness of his mind. It was inevitable. And does not the inevitable come from God? One thing only was sure to his divided heart. To rescue this helpless girl would be a deed of true love. And is not love the light of the soul? Artaban took the pearl from his bosom. Never had it seemed so luminous, so radiant, so full of tender living luster. He laid it in the palm of the slave. "This is thy ransom, daughter. It is the last of my treasures, which I saved for the king." As he spoke, the darkness of the sky thickened. Shuddering tremors ran through the earth, heaving convulsively like one who struggles with mighty grief. Walls of the houses rocked to and fro. Stones loosened, crashed into the street. Soldiers fled in terror, reeling like drunken men. But Artaban and the girl whom he had ransomed crouched helpless beneath the wall of the praetorium. What had he to fear? What had he to live for? He had given away his last remnant of his tribute for the king. He had parted with the last hope of finding him. His quest was over. and it had failed. But even in that thought, accepted and embraced, there was peace. It was not resignation. It was not submission. It was something more profound and searching. And Artaban knew that even if he could live his earthly life over again, it would not have been otherwise than it had been. One more lingering pulsation of the earthquake quivered through the ground. A heavy towel, shaken from the roof, fell and hit the old man upon the temple. He lay breathless and pale, with his gray head resting against a young girl's shoulder and the blood trickling from the wound. As she bent over him, fearing that he was dead, there came a voice through the twilight, very small and still, like music sounding in the distance, in which the notes are clear, but the words are lost. The girl turned to see if someone had spoken from the window above, but she saw no one. Then the old man's lips began to move as if in answer, and she heard him say in the Parthian tongue, "Not so, my lord, for when saw I thee a stranger and took thee in? When saw I thee naked and clothed thee, or in prison and came unto thee? 33 years have I looked for thee, but never have I seen thy face." He ceased, and a sweet voice came again, and again the maid heard it, very faintly and far away, but this time it seemed as though she understood the words. "Verily, verily, I say unto thee, inasmuch as thou hast done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, thou hast done it unto me." A calm radiance of wonder and joy lighted the pale face of Artaban, like the first ray of dawn on a snowy mountain peak. One long, last breath of relief exhaled gently from his lips. His journey was ended. His treasures were accepted. The otherwise had found the King. Amen.
Perfect.